What happens when two of entertainment's biggest personalities collide on live television in a way nobody saw coming? The Kelly Clarkson Show is known for its upbeat atmosphere and feel-good interviews. But what unfolded between Kelly and Sylvester Stallone turned into one of the most uncomfortable moments in daytime television history. Before we get into what happened, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us what you think about this whole situation. The interview started innocently enough. Kelly welcomed Stallone to the stage with her signature enthusiasm, and the audience erupted in applause. Stallone walked out with his usual confident stride, waving to the crowd as he made his way to the guest chair. The energy in the room was electric, everyone expecting another charming conversation with the action legend. Kelly kicked things off with what seemed like a standard question. She asked Stallone about his latest project, a new documentary about his life and career. Stallone began talking about the challenges of looking back at his journey, the ups and downs, the rejections early on. Kelly was nodding along, but then she interjected with something that would shift the entire tone of the conversation. She brought up a topic that Stallone had specifically requested not to discuss, his recent family disagreements that had been making headlines. Kelly framed it as wanting to address the elephant in the room, saying the audience deserved to hear his side of things. You could see Stallone's expression change immediately. His jaw tightened, and there was a pause that felt like it lasted forever. Stallone, calmly but firmly, said he wasn't going to talk about that. He reminded Kelly that his team had made it clear certain subjects were off limits. Kelly, perhaps thinking she could smooth it over with charm, pushed back gently. She said that, as a public figure, he had to expect these questions, and that fans were curious because they cared about him. That's when things started to escalate. Stallone leaned forward in his chair, and his voice dropped lower. He told Kelly that there's a difference between caring and prying, and that just because someone is famous doesn't mean they forfeit their right to privacy. The audience went quiet. You could feel the tension spreading through the studio like wildfire. Kelly tried to recover by saying she meant no disrespect, that she was just trying to have an honest conversation. But Stallone wasn't having it. He pointed out that honest doesn't mean invasive, and that she had agreed to certain parameters before he even came on the show. He said his publicist had been very clear about boundaries, and he felt blindsided. The camera cut to Kelly, and you could see her trying to maintain her composure. She apologized, but then added that sometimes the most meaningful conversations happen when we're willing to be vulnerable. Stallone immediately fired back, asking her if she would appreciate someone ambushing her with questions about her personal life after she'd asked him not to. Kelly looked taken aback. She said she's always been open about her life, her divorce, her struggles. Stallone nodded slowly and said that's her choice, and he respects that. But everyone gets to make their own choice about what they share. He emphasized that he came on the show to talk about his work, his career, the documentary, not to be interrogated about family matters. The audience was completely silent now. Some people looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. Kelly tried to move on, asking about a scene in the documentary, but the damage was done. The atmosphere had changed completely. Stallone answered her question, but his responses were clipped, professional, and cold. There was no warmth left in the exchange. Kelly attempted to lighten the mood with a joke about Rocky, asking if he felt like he was going rounds with her right now. Stallone didn't laugh. He said this wasn't a boxing match, it was about respect, and he felt that respect had been broken the moment she brought up something he'd explicitly said was private. She asked him if they could start over, if they could reset and have the conversation they were supposed to have. Stallone said he didn't think that was possible at this point, that trust once broken isn't easily repaired, even in a 30-minute interview. Kelly looked genuinely distressed now, realizing this wasn't going to be salvaged easily. Then Kelly made another attempt, saying that her show has always been about real conversations, about getting past the surface-level stuff that other shows do. Stallone interrupted her, his voice rising slightly. He said, there's nothing fake about setting boundaries, and that real conversations are built on mutual respect, not gotcha moments. The audience remained frozen as Kelly tried to defend her approach. She explained that her show has always been different because she's willing to ask the questions other hosts won't. Stallone shot back immediately, saying that just because you can ask something doesn't mean you should. He told her there's a difference between being bold and being disrespectful, and right now she was crossing that line. Kelly's face flushed. She said she never intended to disrespect him, that she admires his career and everything he's accomplished. Stallone cut her off, saying admiration means nothing if it's not backed up by actions. He said you don't ambush people you admire. You don't trap them on live television into discussing things they've made clear are off limits. Then Kelly made a move that surprised everyone. She brought up how Stallone himself has been open about his struggles in the past, how he's talked about his childhood, his father, his early poverty. She asked why those topics were acceptable, but this one wasn't. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Stallone's response was measured but firm. He explained that he chose to share those stories, that he opened up about them when he was ready, on his own terms. He said the key word there is choice. He didn't have someone forcing it out of him when he'd explicitly asked them not to. He looked directly at Kelly and said that's the difference between vulnerability and violation. Kelly shifted in her seat. She argued that public figures have a responsibility to their fans, that people who support them deserve to know what's happening in their lives. Stallone shook his head, clearly frustrated now. He said fans deserve honesty, not every single detail of your existence. He told her that the same fans she's talking about are the ones who respect when someone says they need privacy. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Kelly tried a different angle, asking Stallone if he thought she was being unfair. He didn't hesitate. He said yes, absolutely, and that he thought she was putting her show's ratings above his clearly stated boundaries. That landed like a punch. Kelly visibly recoiled, and you could see hurt flash across her face. She told him that was harsh, that she's never prioritized ratings over treating her guests well. Stallone raised his eyebrows and asked her what she called what just happened. He said, if this isn't about ratings, then what is it about? Because it certainly isn't about respecting him as a guest. Kelly started to respond but stumbled over her words, clearly shaken by the accusation. Stallone pressed on. He said that in all his years of doing interviews, across every continent, with every type of show, he's rarely felt as disrespected as he does right now. He said it takes a lot to make him uncomfortable, but she'd managed to do it. The audience gasped. Some people looked at each other in disbelief. This was not the feel-good show they'd expected. Kelly took a deep breath and said she understood he was upset, but that she still believed the question was fair game. Stallone's eyes widened. He asked her if she was seriously doubling down on this right now. She said she wasn't trying to upset him, but that journalism sometimes means asking difficult questions. Stallone laughed, but there was no humor in it. He said this isn't journalism, it's a talk show, and there's a difference. He continued, saying that journalists build trust over time. They do their research, they approach sensitive subjects with care and permission. He said what she did was ambush him with something his team explicitly said was off the table, and then tried to justify it by calling it honest conversation. Kelly looked like she wanted to crawl under her desk. Then Stallone said something that really hit hard. He told Kelly that she's talented, that she's built an incredible career, but that talent doesn't give anyone the right to bulldoze through other people's boundaries. He said he's seen young people come up in this industry thinking they can do whatever they want, and it always ends badly. Kelly's expression hardened at that. You could tell that comment stung. She asked him if he was calling her entitled. Stallone said he wasn't putting a label on it, but that her actions spoke for themselves. He said when someone tells you no, and you push anyway, what else would you call that? Kelly fired back, saying she's always pushed boundaries in her career. That's how she got where she is. Stallone nodded and said there's pushing boundaries in your own life and pushing boundaries in someone else's, and she needed to learn the difference. Kelly's face was red now, and you could see her trying to maintain her professional demeanor. She told Stallone that maybe they just had different perspectives on what constitutes a fair question. Stallone immediately responded, saying it's not about perspective, it's about consent. He said his team communicated clearly what was off limits. She agreed to those terms, and then she broke that agreement on live television. She tried to interject, but Stallone kept going. He said this is exactly why some celebrities stop doing interviews altogether, because hosts think they can trap you once the cameras are rolling. He said it's manipulative, and it's wrong, and she should know better. The audience was completely still. Nobody was even coughing. Everyone was locked in on this confrontation. Kelly finally found her voice and said she resented the implication that she's manipulative. She said she's known for being kind, for creating a safe space for her guests. Stallone tilted his head and asked her if this felt like a safe space to her. He said safe spaces are built on trust, and she'd demolished that trust in the first 5 minutes of the interview. Then Kelly did something unexpected. She got emotional. Her voice cracked slightly as she said she never meant to hurt him, that she genuinely thought having an open dialogue would be beneficial. Stallone's expression softened just a fraction, but his words remained firm. He said intent doesn't erase impact, and that she needs to understand that good intentions don't justify crossing lines. He continued, saying that every person, famous or not, deserves to have their boundaries respected. He told her that he's spent decades in this business. He's seen every trick in the book, and he knows when someone is trying to create a moment for their show at his expense. Kelly looked stricken. She said that wasn't what this was, but Stallone said the evidence suggested otherwise. Kelly tried to steer back to his documentary, asking about the process of putting it together, but Stallone stopped her. He said they needed to address what just happened before moving on to anything else. He told her that you don't just get to drop a bomb and then pretend everything is fine. He said if she wanted to have a real conversation, they needed to talk about what she'd done. Kelly looked frustrated now. She said she'd apologized. She'd explained her reasoning, and she didn't know what else he wanted from her. Stallone leaned back and said he wanted accountability. He said an apology without changed behavior is just manipulation, and he wanted to know if she understood why what she did was wrong, not just that he was upset about it. The question caught Kelly off guard. She sat there for a moment, clearly thinking. Then she said she understood that she'd made him uncomfortable, and that wasn't her goal. Stallone shook his head. He said that's not the same thing. He asked her if she understood that she'd violated an agreement, that she'd tried to exploit his presence on her show to get content he'd explicitly said he wouldn't provide. Kelly's jaw tightened. She said exploit was a strong word. Stallone said it was an accurate word. He told her that's exactly what it is when you use someone's appearance on your platform to push them into corners they've asked you not to put them in. He said she had all the power in this situation. It's her show, her audience, her crew, and she'd used that power against him. That seemed to hit Kelly hard. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said she never thought about it that way, that she'd never considered the power dynamic. Stallone said that's part of the problem, that hosts often forget they hold all the cards, and guests are in a vulnerable position whether it looks like it or not. He went on, saying that just because he's Sylvester Stallone, just because he's been in blockbuster movies and is wealthy and famous, doesn't mean he's not vulnerable when he's sitting in that guest chair. He said everyone has things they're protecting, everyone has wounds that haven't healed, and steamrolling over that because you think you deserve the story is cruel. Kelly looked genuinely remorseful now. She said she never wanted to be cruel. That cruelty goes against everything she stands for. Stallone nodded and said then she needs to examine why her actions don't match her values. He said this is a teaching moment, not just for her, but for every host who thinks that fame means fair game. The audience started to shift uncomfortably. This had gone from awkward to intensely personal. Kelly asked Stallone what he wanted her to do now. He said he wanted her to acknowledge, clearly and without qualification, that she was wrong to bring up that topic after agreeing not to. Kelly hesitated. You could see her wrestling with it. She started to speak, then stopped. She looked at her producers off camera, then back at Stallone. Finally, she said she could acknowledge that he felt blindsided, and that she regretted making him feel that way. Stallone immediately caught the wording. He said she was still deflecting, still making it about his feelings rather than her actions. He asked her point blank if she thought what she did was wrong. Kelly bit her lip. She said she thought it was a judgment call that didn't land the way she hoped. Stallone's expression hardened again. He told her that's politician speak. That's the kind of non-apology that means nothing. He said either she thinks she was wrong or she doesn't, and he wanted a straight answer. The tension ratcheted up another notch. Kelly looked directly at him and said she thinks the question itself was valid, but that the timing and approach could have been better. Stallone stood up from his chair. The audience gasped. He said that's all he needed to hear, that she clearly didn't understand the problem at all. Kelly quickly stood too, asking him to please sit back down, that they could work through this. Stallone said there's nothing to work through if she still thinks the question was valid after he'd said it was off limits. He told her that's the fundamental issue. She believes her right to ask supersedes his right to decline. Kelly pleaded with him, saying she didn't mean it that way, that she was trying to be honest about her thought process. He turned to face her fully and said, honesty without wisdom is just noise. He said she's being honest that she still thinks she had the right to ask, and he's being honest that he finds that completely unacceptable. He told her that this is why the relationship between media and celebrities has become so toxic, because people like her think access means ownership. Kelly's voice rose slightly. She said that's not fair, that she's always treated her guests with respect and kindness. Stallone countered, saying respect isn't just about tone and smiles. It's about honoring agreements and boundaries. He said she can be the sweetest person in the world, but if she doesn't respect boundaries, the sweetness means nothing. The producers were signaling frantically now, but both Kelly and Stallone ignored them. Kelly said she's built her entire career on connecting with people, on breaking down walls. Stallone said there's a difference between walls and boundaries, and that she needs to learn to recognize when someone is protecting themselves for good reason, rather than just being difficult. He told her that not every wall needs to be broken down, that sometimes walls are there for protection and healing, and trying to break them down is an act of aggression, not connection. Kelly looked like she'd been slapped. She said she never thought of it as aggression. Stallone said that's because she's always been on the side with the power. Kelly's eyes filled with tears. She said she's been vulnerable on her own show countless times, that she knows what it's like to share painful things. Stallone's voice softened just slightly but remained firm. He said that's her choice, and he respects it, but she can't project her relationship with vulnerability onto everyone else. He said, just because she processes things publicly doesn't mean everyone should or has to. Kelly wiped at her eyes and took a shaky breath. She told Stallone that she was trying to understand his perspective, that she wanted to make this right. Stallone sat back down slowly, and Kelly followed suit. He said, making it right means actually hearing what he's saying, not just waiting for him to stop talking so she can defend herself again. She nodded and said she was listening. Stallone explained that throughout his career, he's had people try to break him down, to get him to reveal things before he was ready, and every single time it felt like a betrayal. He said when he comes on a show now, He sets boundaries clearly because he's learned that if you don't protect yourself, nobody else will. Kelly listened without interrupting this time. He continued, saying that when she brought up that topic, despite the agreement, it felt like every other time someone had tried to exploit him for content. He said it didn't matter that her show is usually uplifting or that she's known for being kind. In that moment, she made him feel like a product to be mined for ratings rather than a person to be respected. Kelly's voice was quiet when she spoke. She said she was starting to understand how deeply she'd messed up. Stallone said, "Understanding is the first step, but it can't end there." He told her that if she really wants to be different from other hosts, if she really wants to create that safe space she talks about, she has to mean it when guests set boundaries, not just pay lip service to it. She asked him how she could do better going forward. Stallone said it's simple. When someone says no, you respect it without trying to negotiate or find a backdoor. He said there's no clever way to ask something that someone has said they won't discuss. There's just respecting their decision and moving on. Kelly said that sounded so obvious when he put it that way. Stallone said the obvious things are often the hardest to actually do, especially when you're in an industry that rewards boundary pushing. He told her that the media landscape has conditioned everyone to think that the most invasive question is the most valuable one. But that's backwards. He said the most valuable conversations happen when people feel safe enough to open up on their own terms. Kelly said she wished she could take back the last 20 minutes. Stallone said she can't, but she can learn from them. He told her that this moment, right here, as uncomfortable as it is, could be the thing that changes how she approaches every interview going forward. He said pain is a powerful teacher if you're willing to be a student. The audience had been silent for so long that when someone coughed it sounded like a gunshot. Kelly looked out at them and then back at Stallone. She said she owed him and the audience a real apology. Stallone said he was listening. Kelly took a deep breath and spoke directly to the camera. She said she made a serious mistake today, that she violated an agreement with her guest and tried to justify it with reasoning that doesn't hold up. She said Stallone was right that she'd prioritized getting a moment over respecting a boundary, and that goes against everything she claims her show stands for. She turned to Stallone and said she was genuinely sorry, not just that he was upset, but for what she did. Stallone studied her face for a moment. Then he said he appreciated that, and that he believed she meant it. He said the real test would be whether this changed anything moving forward. Kelly said she promised it would, that this had been a wake-up call she clearly needed. Stallone said he hoped so, because she had a platform that reached millions of people, and how she used that platform mattered. Kelly asked if they could try to salvage the rest of the interview, if he'd be willing to talk about what he actually came here to discuss. Stallone considered it. He said he'd try, but that the trust would take time to rebuild. Kelly said she understood and that she appreciated him even being willing to try. She asked him about the documentary again, and this time Stallone engaged. He talked about the process of reflecting on his life, the lessons he'd learned, the regrets he carried. His voice was still guarded, not as warm as it would have been if the earlier conflict hadn't happened, but he was participating. Kelly asked thoughtful questions, careful not to step anywhere near personal territory. As they talked, you could feel the atmosphere in the studio slowly shift. It wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile anymore either. Stallone discussed his early struggles in Hollywood, the rejection he faced, how he fought for Rocky to be made his way. Kelly listened intently, asking follow-up questions that showed she was genuinely engaged with what he was saying. Stallone talked about the difference between the characters he plays and who he is as a person. He said people often assume he's as tough as Rocky or Rambo, but that he's just a guy who's good at pretending on camera. Kelly said she thought a lot of people would be surprised to hear him say that. Stallone said good, people should be surprised more often. It keeps them from making assumptions. Kelly carefully asked about his approach to choosing roles now versus earlier in his career. Stallone said he's more selective now, that he doesn't need to prove anything anymore, so he only takes on projects that genuinely interest him or that he feels have something meaningful to say. Kelly said the documentary seemed to fall into that category. Stallone agreed. He said, looking back at your own life is terrifying because you have to confront all the mistakes and wrong turns. But it's also liberating because you realize you survived all of it. Kelly said that was a beautiful way to put it. Stallone said beauty often comes from pain. You just have to be willing to sit with the pain long enough to find it. The interview wrapped up with Kelly thanking Stallone for staying and for the difficult but important conversation they'd had. Stallone said he hoped people watching learned something from it, both about setting boundaries and about respecting them. Kelly said she certainly had. The audience applauded, though it was more subdued than the opening ovation. So what do you think about how this whole thing went down? Should Kelly have pushed the way she did, or was Stallone right to call her out so directly? Make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below with your thoughts. Do you think Kelly learned her lesson, or will hosts keep crossing these lines for the sake of content?